My husband called me a parasite in front of his rich friends and left me a $8,000 bill. Know your place, he sneered. I just smiled. Today, my phone erupted with 23 missed calls. A parasite. That was the word my husband chose to use. He delivered it with perfect, chilling clarity across our dinner table at Chateau Blanc, his voice effortlessly cutting through the restaurant's elegant ambience. 17 of his wealthiest business associates sat frozen, their eyes darting between him and me. The champagne flute in his hand remained perfectly steady. Not a single drop spilled as he stood up, adjusted his designer suit jacket, and walked out of the private dining room. He left me sitting there on my 35th birthday, staring down at an $8,000 dinner bill resting on a silver platter. I could feel the collective judgment of the room pressing down on my shoulders, waiting for me to break down, waiting for the pathetic school teacher to cry. But I didn't cry. To understand how I got to that table, to that ridiculous bill, and to that moment of absolute clarity, I need to take you back to the beginning of the end. My day always started at 5:30 in the morning. For years, I was the ghost that haunted our own house before the sun came up. The alarm never woke Preston anymore. He had trained himself to sleep right through it, knowing I would quietly slip out from under the heavy-down comforter to begin the ritual our marriage had slowly deteriorated into. I walked down the curved staircase to a kitchen that looked like a spread in an architectural digest, a monument to everything Preston believed mattered in this world. Everything was cold marble and stainless steel. First, the Italian espresso machine that cost more than most people's used cars. It required exactly 14 seconds to grind the beans. Not 13, not 15. The water had to be heated to exactly 200 degrees. The Venetian cups his mother had gifted us had to be warmed with hot water before pouring. I moved through this massive, immaculate space feeling completely hollow. I remembered the cramped galley kitchen in our very first apartment, back when Preston was just an ambitious associate instead of a hedge fund partner with impossible demands. Back then, we danced while waiting for cheap pasta water to boil. Now, he took his coffee standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, frantically reviewing overnight market reports on his phone, barely acknowledging that I was breathing the same air. When he finally walked in that morning, he didn't say happy birthday. He didn't even look up from his screen. He took a sip of his coffee, grimaced slightly, and said, "We have Donovan and the others tonight. Wear the black dress, Nora. And do something about your hair. It looks tired." I stood there holding my own cheap mug, swallowing the lump in my throat, realizing that my 35th birthday was just another networking event. Another performance where I had to play the grateful, quiet wife. It wasn't always like this. Preston's cruelty wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a slow, methodical chipping away of my identity, a calculated campaign to make me feel small. I remember a Tuesday about 2 years ago, right around the time he made partner. I had come home from an exhausting day of parent-teacher conferences. My feet ached, my head was throbbing, and all I wanted was comfort. I stopped at the grocery store and bought a box of cheap, artificial macaroni and cheese. It was the stuff I grew up on, the bright orange powder that tasted like pure childhood nostalgia. I was standing at the stove, stirring the pot, actually smiling for the first time that week. Preston walked through the door with his briefcase, took one look at the stove, and his face contorted in absolute disgust. He walked over, grabbed the pot right off the burner, and dumped the entire thing straight into the garbage disposal. I just stood there in shock as he flipped the switch, grinding my dinner into mush. "We don't eat garbage anymore, Nora," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "We have an image to maintain. People are watching us now." He opened our massive refrigerator, pulled out a block of imported artisan cheese that cost $90, and dropped it on the marble counter. "Eat this," he commanded. "Learn how to have some class." That was the moment I realized I wasn't his partner anymore. I was a project. I was his ongoing public relations crisis that needed constant management. Whenever we hosted his older, wealthy clients, he paraded me around as proof of his humility. He loved to put his arm around me and tell them, "Nora is a public school teacher. She has such a big heart for the underprivileged." It made him look grounded. It made him look compassionate to be married to a working-class woman who gave back to the community. He used my profession as a shield against his own ruthless greed. Behind closed doors, he mocked my salary, calling my $40,000 a year a cute little hobby. He systematically isolated me from anything and anyone that didn't fit his aesthetic. But I stayed. I stayed because I had convinced myself that this was what success looked like, and that the man who used to dance with me in our first apartment was still buried somewhere under all those bespoke suits and luxury watches. I was wrong. By 7:15 that morning, I was pulling my 5-year-old sedan into the cracked asphalt parking lot of the elementary school. It was a 30-minute drive from the hyper-wealthy, perfectly manicured lawns of Winnetka down to a middle-class neighborhood where real people actually lived. Stepping out of my car, I traded the suffocating smell of Preston's expensive cologne for the scent of construction paper, floor wax, and cafeteria food. This place was my sanctuary. This was the only place in the world where I was still just Nora, where my worth wasn't tied to the brand of my shoes or the zip code on my driver's license. My third-grade classroom was a chaotic, beautiful mess. There were 28 desks shoved together, walls covered in uneven multiplication tables, and drawings of families where dogs somehow had 5 legs. As soon as I walked through the door, the noise hit me like a warm hug. "Happy birthday, Miss Nora." Daisy, a tiny girl with missing front teeth, launched herself at my knees. The rest of the class swarmed me immediately. They had somehow figured out my birthday and spent their free reading time making cards. My desk was buried under 28 pieces of folded paper, covered in an aggressive amount of glitter that I knew would haunt my clothes for the next 6 months. I sat down and read them one by one. The spelling was terrible, the grammar was worse, but the declarations of love were so pure they made my chest ache. Oliver, a boy who struggled with reading, had drawn a picture of me that made my arms look 10 feet long, writing that I was the best teacher in the whole universe. This was a kind of wealth Preston would never understand. It was a wealth that couldn't be deposited, leveraged, or bragged about at the country club. During my lunch break, I sat in the fluorescent-lit teacher's lounge, eating a $3 cafeteria salad that tasted 1,000 times better than the extravagant meals I was forced to choke down with Preston's clients. My friend and fellow teacher asked me about my birthday plans. I tried to sound upbeat when I mentioned dinner at Chateau Blanc, but I knew my eyes gave me away. I told her 17 people were coming because Preston was trying to land a new account. She gave me that deeply sympathetic look teachers give a child who just got a wrong answer. I brushed it off, but her pity stung. It was a harsh reminder of the massive, unbridgeable gap between the life I was living and the life I actually wanted. That afternoon, I had to survive another one of Preston's mandatory social obligations. It was the monthly spouse luncheon at the Riverside Country Club. My stomach tied itself into agonizing knots the second I pulled through the wrought iron gates. The main dining room was a sea of cream linens and arrangements of white roses that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Preston had explicitly ordered me to cultivate relationships with 2 specific women, Diana and Sylvia. Diana's husband controlled a massive portfolio Preston was desperate to manage, and Sylvia's family connections were legendary. They were the queens of this superficial castle, and I was just the peasant allowed inside for entertainment. I found them standing near the private bar, laughing at something on Diana's phone. They both wore outfits that screamed generational wealth. I approached them in my practical, department store dress, trying to project a confidence I absolutely did not feel. As soon as I stepped up, their conversation stopped dead. Fake, tight smiles slid into place. "Nora, how incredibly cheerful," Diana said, looking me up and down. "Is that from a discount rack? It's so brave of you to wear synthetic fabrics in this heat." I kept my voice perfectly level and replied that it was practical for my work. Sylvia chimed in, her tone dripping with mock sympathy, saying she wished she could pull off such a pedestrian look. We sat down, and the waiter poured a bottle of red wine that Preston usually ordered, a bottle I knew cost well over $300. As Diana reached across the table, her hand mysteriously slipped. A massive wave of dark burgundy wine cascaded directly onto my lap, soaking through my dress in seconds. The gasp she let out was worthy of an Academy Award. "Oh my God, your sweet little dress," she cried out, pressing her napkin into my leg with enough force to ensure the stain set permanently. "I'm so clumsy." I stood up, wine dripping onto the pristine marble floor, feeling the eyes of 50 women turning to stare at me. Some looked sympathetic, but most looked deeply entertained. I excused myself and practically ran to the bathroom. I locked myself in the largest stall, scrubbing at the purple map spreading across my thighs with cheap paper towels. Then, I heard the bathroom door open. It was Diana and Sylvia. They didn't check to see if anyone was inside. I heard Diana laugh a cruel, sharp laugh. "Preston really did marry his charity case, didn't he?" Sylvia scoffed, saying I was a burden and a parasite, an anchor dragging Preston down. I sat on the toilet lid, holding my breath, tears burning my eyes but refusing to fall. I stayed in that stall for 20 minutes, learning the true meaning of learned helplessness. The actual unraveling of my marriage didn't start on my birthday. The first real crack in the facade happened exactly 2 months prior. It was a random Thursday afternoon. I had left school early with a blinding migraine and just wanted to sleep in a dark room. Preston's car wasn't in the driveway, which made sense because he had told me he was flying out to Boston for a grueling 2-day client summit. I took some medication and decided to do a load of laundry to distract myself from the pain in my head. I was emptying the pockets of his expensive dry-clean-only suits when my fingers brushed against a crumpled piece of paper deep inside his jacket lining. I pulled it out. It was a receipt. My eyes scanned the elegant font. La Bernardine. A massive dinner bill for 2 people. Oysters. 2 bottles of vintage champagne. A chocolate souffle. The date on the top of the receipt was from yesterday. The timestamp was 8:45 at night. The exact same time he had texted me from his hotel room, claiming he was exhausted from Boston traffic and ordering room service alone. My hands started to tremble so violently that the receipt rattled. I dropped it on the floor and grabbed the jacket again, inspecting it under the bright laundry room lights. On the inside of the collar, faint but undeniable, was a smear of lipstick. It was a dark, plum color. I have never worn plum lipstick in my life. And then I smelled it. Beneath the scent of his usual cologne was something heavy, musky, and sickeningly sweet. An expensive perfume that definitely didn't belong to me. My stomach completely dropped. The migraine vanished, replaced by a wave of intense, overwhelming nausea. I sprinted to the guest bathroom and spent the next hour violently throwing up, my body physically rejecting the reality that my brain was desperately trying to deny. I sat on the cold tile floor, clutching my stomach, gasping for air. Every late night at the office, every weekend conference, every sudden business trip flashed before my eyes. I was living a lie. But instead of crying, a strange, cold survival instinct kicked in. I crawled back to the laundry room, grabbed my phone, and took crystal-clear photos of the receipt, the lipstick stain, and the jacket. I created a hidden folder on my phone labeled tax documents. Then, I carefully folded the receipt back into the exact shape it was in, slid it back into the pocket, and hung the suit up. I wasn't ready to blow up my life. Not yet. When Preston finally came home that evening, rolling his suitcase through the front door, I was standing in the kitchen stirring a pot of soup. My heart was hammering so hard against my ribs I thought he would be able to hear it across the room. He walked up behind me, kissed the top of my head, and sighed heavily. Boston was an absolute nightmare, he complained, loosening his tie. The clients were demanding, the flights were delayed, and I barely got an ounce of sleep. I just smiled, pouring the soup into 2 bowls. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, keeping my voice light and steady. "Did you at least get a decent dinner at the hotel?" He looked right into my eyes without a single flinch. "Just a terrible turkey club sandwich in my room." I was too dead to go out. We sat down at the dining table, and I watched him eat. I watched the man I had promised my life to lie to my face with the ease of someone talking about the weather. He took a spoonful of soup, paused, and sighed again. "A bit heavy on the salt, Nora," he said, pushing the bowl away. "You know I have to watch my sodium. Next time, just stick to the recipe." He leaned back in his chair, suddenly playing the victim, lecturing me about how hard he works to provide this incredible life for us, and how the least I could do was manage a simple dinner. That was the moment the illusion shattered entirely. He didn't just cheat on me. He enjoyed the power trip of deceiving me. He loved standing in front of me, smelling like another woman, and making me feel inadequate over a bowl of soup. This was textbook psychological manipulation. He was constantly rearranging my reality, so I would never trust my own instincts. He wanted me insecure. He wanted me constantly striving for his approval, terrified of making a mistake, so I would never have the energy or the confidence to question his movements. I nodded, apologized for the salt, and quietly cleared the table. I washed the dishes with methodical precision. He went to his study to take a call, completely unaware that his subservient, terrified wife had just emotionally checked out of the marriage forever. The grief was gone. What replaced it was a quiet, absolute rage. For the next 2 weeks, insomnia became my closest friend. I would lie awake in our king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic, peaceful breathing of a man who was systematically destroying my life. The adrenaline wouldn't let me sleep. Every night, my mind raced through 1,000 different exit strategies, but they all hit the same brick wall. Money. 2 years ago, when we had our worst fight and I threatened to leave, Preston had quietly drained our checking accounts, leaving me with a declined debit card at a gas station. He showed me exactly how trapped I was. If I left now, I would leave with nothing. At 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, I couldn't take it anymore. I slowly slid out of bed, making sure the mattress didn't creak. I crept down the dark hallway to his home office. The door was always locked. Preston told me it was for client confidentiality, but months ago, I had found his spare key in his gym bag and paid $5 to have a copy made at a hardware store. I slipped the brass key into the lock. It clicked open. I stepped inside and pulled the heavy curtains completely shut before turning on a small desk lamp. I went straight to his filing cabinet and found the heavy folder marked legal. Inside was our prenuptial agreement. He had rushed me to sign it the morning of our wedding, dismissing it as standard corporate procedure. I sat on the plush rug and read through the 18 pages of dense legal jargon. Most of it was exactly what I expected. In the event of a divorce, Preston kept his investments, his properties, his retirement accounts, and the house. I walked away with a tiny severance package that wouldn't cover 6 months of rent in Chicago. But then, buried deep on page 12, under a convoluted subsection, I found it. The moral turpitude clause. The text stated that if either party was found guilty of financial crimes, felony fraud, or documented, proven adultery that brought public disgrace to the marriage, the entire agreement was rendered null and void. The protections would vanish. All assets would be subject to equal division. Preston's lawyers had probably thought the clause was a joke, a standard inclusion for celebrities, not something a public school teacher would ever trigger. I pulled out my phone and photographed every single page, making sure the text was perfectly clear. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was an investigator, gathering ammunition for a war he didn't even know had started. The turning point came a week later at an annual teachers' conference downtown. I was sitting at a round table, picking at a dry pastry, completely exhausted. A colleague introduced me to a friend of hers who was visiting for the weekend. Her name was Cassandra. Cassandra didn't look like a teacher. She wore a sharp, tailored suit and had eyes that seemed to scan and catalog everything in the room instantly. We exchanged polite hellos, but as the conversation drifted, I felt her gaze lingering on me. During a break, while the others went to get coffee, she sat down directly across from me. "When was the last time you slept for more than 3 hours?" she asked. Her voice wasn't pitying, it was purely analytical. I blinked, caught off guard by the directness. I tried to laugh it off, blaming it on grading papers, but she cut me off gently. "I'm a forensic accountant," she said, leaning in closer so no one else could hear. "I specialize in high-net-worth divorce cases. I spend my life untangling hidden assets and finding the money men try to bury." I look at you, Nora, and I see a woman who is carrying a massive, terrifying secret and who is realizing she is completely outgunned. My breath hitched. It was terrifying to be seen so clearly, so instantly. I didn't say a word, but the tears that sprang to my eyes were answer enough. Cassandra reached into her sleek leather bag and slid a crisp white business card across the table. It stopped right next to my coffee cup. "Knowledge is power, Nora," she said softly. "The men I investigate build their entire empires on the assumption that their wives will be too scared, too tired, or too intimidated by the math to look closely at the numbers. Don't be intimidated. When you're ready to stop being afraid, call me." She stood up and walked away, leaving me staring at the piece of cardstock. I tucked it into my wallet, hiding it behind my grocery store loyalty card. I carried that card for 3 agonizing days. I debated, I panicked, I almost threw it away. But on the 3rd day, sitting in my car during recess, listening to my students laugh on the playground, I realized I owed it to myself to fight back. I picked up my phone and dialed the number. If you are loving this story of betrayal and calculated revenge, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Also, leave a comment below with the name of the city you are watching from. Every single comment helps push this video to more people who love a good drama. Thank you so much for your support. Now, let's get back to the story. I met Cassandra at a dingy, dimly lit diner on the outskirts of the city, miles away from anywhere Preston or his friends would ever set foot. I brought a thick manila envelope crammed with every bank statement, credit card bill, and tax return I had managed to photograph and print from his home office. Cassandra ordered black coffee, pushed her sleeves up, and went to work. Watching her analyze financial documents was like watching a master musician read sheet music. She didn't just see numbers, she saw a narrative. She saw the exact blueprint of my husband's lies. For the first 30 minutes, she didn't speak. She just highlighted rows, cross-referenced dates, and tapped furiously on her calculator. Finally, she looked up, her expression grim. "He is incredibly arrogant, Nora," she said, sliding a bank statement toward me. "Look at this checking account. You thought this was your primary joint account, right? It is, but look at these automated transfers. Every month on the 15th, exactly $12,000 is routed out to an LLC you don't own. That money is being funneled into a secondary account." She pulled out a credit card statement I had never seen before. She had run a background trace using the LLC's tax ID. "This is the shadow life," she explained, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the charges. "Look at the patterns. Charges at luxury hotels in the city on Tuesday afternoons. Huge bills at high-end lingerie boutiques. $5,000 for a diamond tennis bracelet 2 months ago. Did you get a bracelet?" I shook my head, my throat tight. Then she pointed to a recurring charge for an upscale apartment lease downtown. "He is maintaining a second household, Nora. He's spending over $140,000 a year on another woman, using money drawn directly from your marital assets." Cassandra asked me for a list of everyone who worked closely with Preston. When I wrote down the name Kelsey, his 25-year-old secretary, Cassandra paused. She cross-referenced the address of the luxury apartment lease. It matched the address on Kelsey's public voter registration. I sat in that diner booth, staring at the hard, mathematical proof of my own humiliation. But the strangest thing happened. I didn't break down. The sheer scale of his betrayal acted like anesthesia. The grieving wife died right there in that booth, and a cold, calculating strategist took her place. The financial records were explosive, but Cassandra warned me that we needed undeniable proof of the adultery to trigger the moral turpitude clause. Financial mismanagement could be argued in court. A paper trail of an affair was bulletproof. That proof fell into my lap on a rainy Saturday morning. Preston was upstairs taking a long, steaming shower. I was downstairs in the mudroom, moving his heavy golf bag so I could sweep the floor. As I lifted the bag, I heard a dull thud. Something had shifted in the bottom pocket. I unzipped it and reached inside, my fingers closing around a piece of cold glass and metal. It was a secondary smartphone. A burner phone. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pressed the power button. The screen lit up, demanding a 4-digit passcode. I had exactly 5 minutes before the water shut off upstairs. I tried our anniversary. Incorrect. I tried his social security digits. Incorrect. Then I remembered Cassandra's words about his staggering arrogance. Narcissists always celebrate themselves, she had said. I typed in his own birthday, month and day. The screen unlocked immediately. I opened the text messages and felt the air leave my lungs. The entire inbox was a continuous, explicit conversation with a contact saved only as Kelsey. I scrolled through months of messages. They weren't just exchanging romantic pleasantries, they were actively mocking me. I saw a message from Preston dated on the night of our anniversary. It read, "I have to endure dinner with the Parasite tonight. I'll make an excuse and come to your place by 10. Keep the red lingerie on." Another message from Kelsey read, "Does she actually believe you're working late again?" Preston's reply made my blood turn to ice. She believes whatever I tell her. She's too terrified of losing this lifestyle to ever question me. It's pathetic, really. I felt a surge of absolute venom. I pulled out my own phone and rapidly photographed dozens of their text exchanges, making sure to capture the dates and the phone numbers. Suddenly, the pipes groaned. The shower upstairs had been turned off. Panic seized me. I furiously closed out the apps on the burner phone, locked the screen, and shoved it deep back into the bottom pocket of the golf bag. I zipped it up just as I heard Preston's heavy footsteps starting down the wooden stairs. I stood up, grabbing the broom, forcing my breathing to slow down. When he walked into the mudroom, toweling off his hair, I smiled at him. "Good morning, honey," I said. I was ready to burn his empire to the ground. Acting on Cassandra's strict instructions, my very first move was to establish financial independence, completely off Preston's radar. I couldn't use any of our joint funds, and I couldn't risk him seeing a credit inquiry on his comprehensive monitoring software. I went to the small credit union affiliated with my teachers' association. Sitting in a cramped cubicle that smelled like stale coffee and printer toner, I opened a secured credit card using only my modest teaching salary and my maiden name. I routed all the statements to a P.O. box I rented near the school. Holding that small piece of plastic in my hand felt like holding a loaded weapon. It was a tiny sliver of autonomy, the first I had possessed in over 5 years. But I needed more than just a credit card. I needed a fortress. I needed the family Preston had methodically cut out of my life. After school that Friday, I didn't drive back to the Winnetka estate. I drove in the opposite direction, toward Blue Island, a working-class suburb where my older sister, Delaney, lived. Preston hated Delaney. He called her loud, unrefined, and claimed her blue-collar husband was a bad influence on his professional image. He had slowly manipulated our schedule so much that I hadn't seen my own sister in nearly 2 years. As I pulled into her driveway and saw the mismatched lawn chairs on her porch, a wave of profound shame washed over me. I had chosen a man's approval over my own blood. I knocked on the door, trembling. When Delaney opened it, wiping her hands on a dish towel, she froze. She took one look at my pale face, my hollow eyes, and the desperation radiating off me, and she didn't ask a single question. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just dropped the towel and pulled me into a hug so fierce it knocked the wind out of me. I broke down completely right there in her doorway, sobbing until my knees gave out. We sat at her worn wooden kitchen table for hours. I told her everything. I told her about the receipt, the burner phone, Kelsey, the hidden accounts, and the suffocating emotional prison my life had become. Delaney's expression shifted from heartbreak to a cold, protective fury. She immediately offered her guest room as a safe house. Over the next few weeks, I began smuggling my life out of Preston's house in my work tote bag. Important tax documents, my birth certificate, and most importantly, my grandmother's jewelry. I was quietly evacuating my own life, preparing for the blast radius of the bomb I was about to drop. As my 35th birthday approached, Preston's anxiety about the upcoming dinner at Chateau Blanc hit a fever pitch. He had invited 17 of the most influential people in his professional circle, and he needed his prop wife to look absolutely flawless. He didn't trust my taste, so he outsourced the problem. 2 days before the dinner, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a team of 3 high-end stylists rolling racks of designer clothing and massive makeup cases into my foyer. Preston had hired them without telling me. The lead stylist, a woman with 0 body fat and a clipboard, looked me up and down with an expression of sheer clinical disappointment. For 3 agonizing hours, my own living room was transformed into a bizarre interrogation chamber. They made me stand in the center of the room while they circled me, poking, prodding, and discussing my physical flaws as if I couldn't hear them. They pinched the fabric of my comfortable sweater, clicking their tongues. They talked about how my skin was looking a bit mature for 34, suggesting aggressive chemical peels and maybe some subtle fillers to balance out my jawline. They forced me into foundational garments that felt like medieval torture devices, trying to squeeze my body into dresses made of architectural wire and stiff, uncomfortable silk. It was deeply, fundamentally dehumanizing. They treated me like a mannequin that was defective right out of the box. But as I stood there, staring at my reflection in the mirror, wearing a severe black designer gown that Preston had pre-approved, I realized something empowering. I wasn't hurt. A year ago, this experience would have sent me into a spiral of self-hatred and extreme dieting. Now, it just fueled my clarity. I nodded politely, thanked them for their time, and agreed to keep the black dress. They packed up and left, completely unaware that I had 0 intention of wearing their expensive armor. I had already chosen my outfit for the dinner. It was a simple, elegant red dress I had bought at a department store years ago, back when I still dressed for myself. I was going to wear red, the color of a warning sign, and I was going to wear my grandmother's emerald earrings. I was done being Preston's perfect, muted shadow. The night before the birthday dinner, I decided I needed to test the trap. I needed to see exactly how Preston would react to the idea of my independence, just to solidify my resolve. We were having a rare, quiet dinner at home. I had cooked a complicated chicken dish, one of the few meals he actually praised, and waited until he was halfway through his 2nd glass of expensive Cabernet. I kept my voice incredibly casual, pretending to focus on cutting my vegetables. I mentioned that the school district was facing budget cuts and that a few parents had approached me about private tutoring. I said I was thinking of taking on a few clients, just for 10 hours a week, to earn a little extra spending money of my own. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. Preston's fork clattered against his porcelain plate. The color drained from his face, only to be replaced by a dark, furious flush that crept all the way up to his hairline. The vein at his temple, the one that only popped out when he was losing a major negotiation, began to throb. "Are you out of your mind?" he hissed, his voice dropping an octave. "My wife does not need to take on a second job like some desperate hourly worker. Do you have any idea what that makes me look like? It makes it look like I cannot provide for my own household." I kept my face neutral, taking a slow sip of water. "I just enjoy teaching, Preston," I replied softly. "And it would be nice to have some money that I earn myself." He slammed his hand flat against the marble table, making the wine glasses jump. "You earn nothing," he spat, pointing a finger directly at my face. "You live in a house you didn't buy, eating food you didn't pay for, wearing clothes I have to hire people to pick out for you. You are a parasite, Nora. You feed off my success while contributing absolutely nothing to my bottom line. You will not embarrass me by begging for scraps from suburban housewives. Understand?" I looked right into his furious, bulging eyes. I felt no fear, no heartbreak, no submission. I just felt a cold, satisfying confirmation. I nodded slowly and apologized. He had handed me the exact psychological justification I needed. The execution was on. The evening of my 35th birthday arrived with a bitter, biting wind off Lake Michigan. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror and carefully fastened my grandmother's emerald earrings. They were small, modest stones, but they were real, and they carried the weight of a woman who had survived a brutal depression and raised 3 kids on her own. I slipped into my red department store dress. It fit perfectly, a vibrant splash of rebellion against the black funeral shroud Preston had demanded I wear. My phone buzzed on the vanity. It was a text from Preston. Running late. Meeting ran over. Start without me. Of course he was late. Making a grand entrance was always more important than arriving with his wife. I took an Uber to the restaurant, watching the city lights blur past the window. Chateau Blanc was a towering monument to excess, a place where the valet attendants wore better suits than the teachers at my school. Julien, the imposing maitre d', recognized me immediately. His eyes flicked to my red dress, a flicker of surprise crossing his disciplined face, before he led me to the private dining room. As the heavy oak doors swung open, the wall of noise hit me. 17 people were already drinking cocktails and laughing. Donovan was holding court near the bar, telling a loud story about crushing a competitor. Diana and Sylvia were perched on velvet chairs, dripping in diamonds. And sitting right in the middle of the room, adjusting the neckline of a deeply plunging dress, was Kelsey. She turned and locked eyes with me. As I walked closer, the scent hit me like a physical blow. It was the heavy, musky, sickly sweet perfume from Preston's suit jacket. She was wearing it deliberately. She gave me a sharp, victorious smile and said, "Happy birthday, Nora. Preston told me to make sure the champagne was perfectly chilled for you. He's always relying on me for the details." The sheer audacity of it almost took my breath away. Julien led me to my seat. I wasn't placed at the head of the table. I was placed 3 seats down, sandwiched between an assistant who was aggressively typing on his phone and Donovan's date, who didn't even bother to introduce herself. I was completely isolated at my own birthday dinner. I sat down, smoothed my red dress, picked up my water glass, and waited for the show to begin. Preston made his grand entrance 40 minutes later. He swung the doors open, smelling strongly of aged whiskey and completely unapologetic. The table immediately erupted in cheers, as if the actual guest of honor had finally arrived. He didn't even look in my direction. He walked straight to his seat at the head of the table, placing a hand casually on the back of Kelsey's chair as he passed her. "Sorry for the delay, folks," he announced loudly, unbuttoning his jacket. "You all know how it is when real money is on the table. The clients just wouldn't let me leave." It took him 10 minutes of chatting with Donovan and flirting with Kelsey before his eyes finally landed on me. He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes raked over my red dress, his expression souring into deep disgust. "Interesting choice, Nora," he said, his voice carrying perfectly over the clinking glasses. "I thought we specifically discussed appropriate attire for an evening like this." The table went dead silent. Even the waitstaff seemed to freeze in place. I looked back at him, my face completely calm. "It's my birthday, Preston. I wanted to wear something that felt like me." He let out a harsh, cruel laugh. "That is exactly the problem," he sneered, leaning forward so everyone could hear every single word. "You always want to be you instead of trying to be better. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is? Constantly having to explain why my wife insists on working a pathetic job that pays less than our monthly wine budget. Why she refuses to understand basic social dynamics." I looked around the table. 17 people were staring at me, watching a man publicly execute his wife's dignity for sport. "If I am such an embarrassment," I said, my voice steady, "why did you marry me?" The question hung in the heavy air. Preston stood up slowly, his chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. "Because I thought I could fix you," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "I thought I could polish you up and teach you how to belong. But class isn't something you can learn. You're still the same small-town nobody. You are a parasite, Nora. A woman like you should be on her knees, grateful I even looked your way." The waiter, trembling slightly, approached the table and placed the black leather bill folder directly in front of Preston. Preston looked down at it, then looked at me. "This is what I get for trying to elevate someone beneath my station," he announced to the room. "Happy birthday, Nora." He grabbed his coat, turned on his heel, and stormed out of the private room. Less than 10 seconds later, Kelsey muttered something about an early meeting, grabbed her designer bag, and practically sprinted out the door after him. The silence in the private dining room was deafening. 17 wealthy, powerful people suddenly found their fingernails and their phones incredibly fascinating. No one looked me in the eye. No one asked if I was okay. The collective cowardice in the room was almost comical. I slowly reached out and pulled the black leather folder toward me. I opened it. The bill was for $8,420. The cost of a few hours of fake friendship and top-tier steaks. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I opened my small clutch, pulled out the sleek, dark blue credit card from my teacher's credit union, the one with only my name on it, and placed it on top of the receipt. I handed it to the stunned waiter. "Please add a 20% tip," I said clearly. When the waiter brought the slip back, I signed my name with a steady hand. I stood up, smoothed out my red dress, and looked at the remaining guests. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice ringing out in the quiet room. "Drive safely." I walked out of Chateau Blanc with my head held high, leaving them sitting there with their half-empty glasses of expensive champagne. I took an Uber back to the Winnetka estate. I knew exactly what I would find. Preston's expensive car was parked diagonally in the driveway, half on the pristine lawn. Inside, the house was dark. I found him in his massive study. He was passed out cold in his leather chair, a half-empty bottle of scotch resting on the desk. His burner phone was buzzing relentlessly with texts from Kelsey, lighting up the dark room. I stepped out into the hallway and sent a single text to Cassandra. "He's out cold. Bring the drives." 20 minutes later, Cassandra slipped through the front door like a highly trained operative. She didn't say a word. She walked straight into the study, plugged a high-capacity encrypted USB drive into Preston's main desktop computer, and went to work. With the passwords we had already discovered, she bypassed his security in less than a minute. As the progress bar loaded, copying gigabytes of his hidden financial life, she opened a folder labeled Client Portfolios. She gasped softly. "Look at this," she whispered, pointing at the screen. "These aren't just hidden assets. Look at the fee structures for his elderly clients. He's charging them thousands in phantom management fees every single month, siphoning the money into offshore accounts before balancing the books. He's stealing from the elderly. He's committing massive, systematic federal wire fraud." I stared at the numbers scrolling past. The cheating was a betrayal of our marriage. But this was the absolute destruction of his entire life. The checkmate was complete. The next morning, I didn't go to school. I met Julien, the maitre d' from Chateau Blanc, at a quiet coffee shop near the river. He arrived looking nervous, clutching a tablet to his chest. When he sat down, he looked at me with deep, genuine sympathy. "I have worked in fine dining for 30 years, Mrs. Nora," he said quietly. "I have seen terrible behavior. But what your husband did to you last night was the most profoundly cruel thing I have ever witnessed." He slid the tablet across the table. It contained pristine, high-definition security footage from the private dining room. Every angle was covered. Furthermore, the private rooms were equipped with audio recording devices for staff training purposes. Preston's entire speech, calling me a parasite, demanding I be grateful, and storming out, was captured with crystal-clear audio. I thanked Julien, my eyes welling with the first real tears I had shed in weeks. My next meeting was harder. I had arranged a private sit-down with Diana and Sylvia at a discreet hotel lobby lounge. They arrived looking defensive and annoyed, probably expecting me to beg for their social mercy after the disaster of the night before. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I pulled out my laptop and opened a spreadsheet. "You both think my husband is a genius who makes your families incredibly wealthy," I started. "But I think you should see exactly how he's doing it." I showed them the offshore accounts. I showed them how Preston was using their husband's money to cover up his own tracks, exposing their families to massive federal liability. Then I showed Diana the hotel receipts from the nights her husband, Donovan, claimed to be at medical conferences. The receipts proved Donovan was in the city, sharing premium suites with women who definitely weren't Diana, all paid for through Preston's shadow company to hide the paper trail. The color completely drained from their perfectly contoured faces. Sylvia's hands started to shake. Diana stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing. They had spent years looking down on me, treating me like a pathetic, naive outsider. In a matter of 10 minutes, I had shown them that they were just as blind, just as manipulated, and just as betrayed as I was. Send me everything, Diana whispered, her voice stripped of all its usual arrogance. I want every single file. I transferred the documents. I didn't just have evidence anymore. I had powerful, angry allies inside the castle walls. Sunday night was the most intense night of my life. I sat at Delaney's kitchen table with Cassandra, wearing latex gloves, assembling the packages. We treated the documents like they were radioactive, and in a way, they were. We compiled 4 massive, highly organized binders. Every bank transfer was highlighted. Every fake invoice was cross-referenced. The burner phone text messages explicitly discussing the fraud with Kelsey were printed in full color. The security footage from the restaurant was loaded onto 4 separate flash drives. Early Monday morning, I called the school principal and told him I had a family emergency and needed the week off. Then I began my delivery route. I drove downtown and walked into the heavily guarded federal building. I personally handed the first binder to the intake clerk at the Securities and Exchange Commission. The second binder went to the local office of the Internal Revenue Service. The third binder, detailing the specific, predatory theft from elderly clients, was handed to the State Attorney General's office. The clerks at these offices see disgruntled spouses all the time, but when they saw the sheer volume and organization of the forensic data we provided, their expressions shifted from bored to intensely focused. The final drop was at a busy diner, meeting Felix, an investigative journalist who had been trying to crack Preston's firm for over a year but lacked an inside source. I slid a heavy flash drive across the sticky table. Felix plugged it into his laptop, his eyes widening as he scrolled through the explosive files. "You have the smoking gun," he whispered, looking up at me in absolute awe. "The offshore routing, the phantom fees, this is front-page news. This will destroy the firm. I need 48 hours to verify the data." I nodded, standing up from the booth. "Take your time, Felix. I've waited years. I can wait 2 more days." I drove back to the Winnetka estate one last time while Preston was at work. I packed the rest of my clothes into garbage bags, left my wedding ring sitting on the cold marble kitchen counter next to his 14-second espresso machine, and walked out the front door. I drove to Delaney's house, crawled into the guest bed, and slept for 14 hours straight. The silence of Delaney's guest room shattered at exactly 6 in the morning on Tuesday. My phone, which had been blissfully quiet for a day, erupted with a continuous, violent vibration against the wooden nightstand. The screen lit up the dark room like a strobe light. 23 missed calls in the span of 20 minutes. 15 from Preston. 6 from Donovan. 2 from Kelsey. I sat up, pulled the blanket around my shoulders, and watched the notifications roll in with the detached calm of a meteorologist watching a hurricane make landfall. The first voicemail was from Preston at 5:45. His voice was tight, high-pitched, and laced with absolute panic. "Nora, where the hell are you? The FBI is in the lobby of my building. They have warrants. Call me immediately." The second voicemail, 10 minutes later, was purely unhinged. "What did you do? The feds are freezing the accounts. All of them. My clients are screaming. Donovan is being questioned. Answer the damn phone." I didn't answer. I walked downstairs to the kitchen, where Delaney was already pouring coffee. She pointed the remote at the small television on the counter and turned up the volume. The morning business news was live. A helicopter shot showed the sleek glass tower where Preston's firm was headquartered. Dozens of federal agents in dark windbreakers were carrying heavy cardboard banker's boxes and computer servers out of the revolving doors. The anchor's voice was grim. "We have breaking news of a massive federal raid at one of the city's top wealth management firms. Sources indicate the investigation centers on wire fraud and the systemic embezzlement of millions from elderly client portfolios." As I watched the screen, I saw Preston. He wasn't in handcuffs yet, but he was being aggressively escorted out of the building by 2 agents, his designer suit rumpled, holding his briefcase up to shield his face from the aggressive flashes of the paparazzi cameras. Suddenly, tires screeched in the driveway outside. Preston's expensive car hopped the curb, tearing up Delaney's grass. He burst out of the driver's seat, looking completely deranged, and sprinted up the porch steps, hammering his fists against the front door. "Nora, I know you're in there. Fix this. You have to tell them you made a mistake." Delaney calmly walked to the door, leaving the heavy deadbolt locked, and opened the small glass peephole. "You need to leave my property before I call the police, Preston," she said, her voice like ice. Preston screamed through the wood, his voice breaking. "I gave her everything. I elevated her. She was a nobody. I made her." Delaney didn't miss a beat. "No, Preston," she replied. "You made a massive miscalculation. She's not your victim anymore." She closed the peephole. We listened to him sob on the porch for 3 minutes before he finally got in his car and drove away. The legal slaughter was brutal, efficient, and deeply satisfying. Thanks to the mountain of undeniable evidence, Preston didn't just face federal indictments. He faced the absolute wrath of our prenuptial agreement. Sitting in the sterile conference room of my lawyer's office, Preston looked like a hollow shell of a human being. The moral turpitude clause was activated without a hitch. Because he had committed documented financial fraud and adultery, his airtight asset protection completely evaporated. The judge awarded me the Winnetka estate, which I immediately put on the market, and exactly half of all his legitimate, unfrozen investments. Preston lost his career, his reputation, his country club membership, and his freedom. As he signed the final divorce papers, his hand shaking violently, he looked up at me with hollow, defeated eyes. "You took everything from me," he whispered. I looked back, feeling nothing but profound peace. "No, Preston," I replied. "You gave it all away the moment you forgot my worth." That Sunday, I sat in Delaney's warm, chaotic kitchen. The smell of roasting garlic and real, messy food filled the air. My teenage niece, Ruby, was getting ready for her high school homecoming dance. She came downstairs in a beautiful blue dress, looking nervous and unsure of herself. She asked me if she looked okay. I smiled, walked over to my purse, and pulled out the small velvet box containing my grandmother's emerald earrings. I carefully fastened them to her ears. "These belong to a woman who survived the worst the world could throw at her," I told Ruby, looking her straight in the eyes. "She told me these are for brave girls. And I want you to remember something, Ruby. Never, ever let a man convince you that you are small. Your worth isn't determined by his paycheck, his approval, or his anger. You belong in any room you choose to walk into." Ruby hugged me tight, the emeralds catching the warm kitchen light. Monday morning, I drove back to the elementary school. I walked through the double doors, taking a deep breath of the floor wax and the construction paper. As I approached my classroom, I saw a massive, crooked banner taped across my door. It read, "Welcome back, Miss Nora, we missed you." I walked in and 28 kids erupted into cheers. Daisy ran up and hugged my legs. Oliver handed me a drawing of a superhero that vaguely resembled me. I sat down at my chipped, stained desk, surrounded by the beautiful chaos of my real life. I looked at the handmade cards, the smiling faces, and felt a profound, overwhelming sense of gratitude. Preston had spent years trying to convince me I was a parasite, an embarrassment who should be thankful for the scraps from his table. He was wrong. I was the richest woman in the world. Looking back at the ruins of his life, part of me wonders if stripping him of absolutely everything was too harsh. Am I wrong for using his own twisted rules to destroy him, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and ring the bell so you never miss another story of sweet, absolute justice. See you in the next one.